In a space where the wind does not move and sound seems suspended, there is a river of glass flowing through the air. It doesn't shatter, it doesn't stir. It simply glides, carrying within its waters every instant you call now. Some say that time is unstoppable, that its course is fixed. But what if the surface of that river could be touched in such a precise way that in the very same second, the entire surrounding landscape would change? The present, as you know it, may not be a solid fact, but a story your consciousness insists on narrating in the same tone day after day. It's possible there is no reality without the gaze that sustains it, that every detail you see, feel, and believe is, silently, shaping the path that time takes to reach you. And there is an ancient knowledge, preserved for centuries by those who studied the inner space more than the outer, that assures, to change the way you observe is to change the fabric of the moment. Without lifting a finger, without moving a single object, it is possible to redesign the experience you call now. Today, you're going to learn one of these methods, an ancestral trick that doesn't act upon things, but on the invisible axis that holds things as they are. A practice so subtle it may go unnoticed, but so immediate that the moment you apply it, the present becomes something else. Not because the world obeyed, but because you made it be born anew through your gaze. In traditions that emerged long before science attempted to explain the world, there was a silent knowledge. Perception is not just a window outward, it is also a portal inward. Among the classical stages of yoga, the fifth, known as Pratyahara, is considered a turning point. Translated as withdrawal of the senses, many confuse it with a detachment from life, a disconnection from the world. But to those who practiced it in its essence, it was not about escape, it was about realignment. Imagine a theater play. The stage is lit, and the actors, alive in their performance, seem to dominate the scene. But the play only exists while the light remains shining on them. When the spotlight fades, there is no more scenery, no more storyline. That's how the ancient masters understood it. The external world is not autonomous. It depends on the light of attention to keep projecting itself into your consciousness. In Pratyahara, attention is withdrawn like a river returning to its source. The eyes may remain open, but stop capturing the environment automatically. The ears still function, but sound no longer dictates the inner state. It's as if the entryways to the external world are gently closed, not to isolate, but so that the energy once dispersed can gather. This withdrawal does not mean the absence of perception. On the contrary, it opens the possibility of perceiving what was once drowned out by the constant noise of external impressions. The masters said that in this state, the mind stops compulsively reacting to what is outside and begins to register the subtleties of what is within. Micro movements of thought, bodily vibrations, subtle flows of emotion that, in the rush of daily life, often go unnoticed. For the oldest schools, it was within this inner silence that true freedom began. For as long as your attention is captive to what presents itself outside, you remain a spectator, merely watching the script handed to you. But when that energy is withdrawn, you once again occupy the role of the playwright, the one who decides which scenes stay and which disappear. Curiously, this practice was not meant to control reality, but to remind you that the present is not a fixed object. It's a reflection conditioned by how you notice the world. By withdrawing the senses, you interrupt the stream of stimuli that holds the now frozen in a single narrative. And in the moment that stream dissolves, new possibilities begin to emerge. Pratyahara was also used as preparation for deeper stages of meditation, because without the withdrawal of attention, any attempt at inner silence would be invaded by images, sounds, and memories. But there was something even more curious. Ancient reports describe that upon returning from the practice, the world seemed reorganized. Small conflicts lost their grip, familiar faces were seen with a strange sense of newness, and even the air seemed lighter. It's as if the act of interrupting the supply of perceptive energy to a specific configuration of reality forced the scene to reassemble itself, not in the magical sense of altering the physical, but of reorganizing the meaning that sustains it. What once seemed unchangeable becomes malleable, and in the instant the meaning changes, the experience changes too. The masters saw this as a responsibility. If your observation can sustain or dissolve a scene, then every act of perception is also an act of creation. It's not about living detached from the world, but about remembering that participating in it doesn't require submitting to it, that the gaze can be withdrawn not to deny life, but to return to consciousness the power to decide how that life will be felt. At this point, the withdrawal of the senses ceases to be an esoteric concept and becomes something practical. It is a key to redesign how the present is structured. When attention is withdrawn, the linear flow of time seems suspended, as if the glass river we spoke of earlier paused for a moment, waiting for a new touch to resume its movement. It is in that brief interval that the ancient trick acts, opening space for an entirely new moment to reveal itself. Thus, Pratyahara is not about closing your eyes to the world, but about closing the eyes of habit. It is the conscious interruption of an automatic narrative to allow other stories, previously invisible, to emerge. And once you understand this, you begin to realize that reality is not a fixed territory. It's a stage patiently awaiting the direction of your next focus. Modern neuroscience has been investigating a fascinating principle that directly dialogues with the wisdom of practices like Pratyahara. The brain is not a passive observer of reality, it is an active builder of it. This understanding comes from a model known as predictive coding. According to this theory, the brain functions like a cartographer that never stops redrawing the map of the territory you call the world. But it doesn't wait for the territory to speak first. It makes predictions about what it expects to find, and then adjusts or confirms these predictions as it receives sensory information. It's as if perception were less a photograph and more a constant editing of a film. Imagine walking down a road you take every day. Even before you turn the corner, your brain has already constructed a mental image of the bend, the houses, the sound of footsteps on the pavement. When something deviates, a tree that wasn't there, a different smell in the air, there's a small jolt. The prediction didn't match what arrived. In that moment, your brain recalibrates the map. This recalibration is not just a technical detail, it changes how you feel the moment. When predictions are confirmed, there is stability. When they are violated, there is room for surprise, curiosity, even transformation. This is exactly where the ancient trick aligns with science. By deliberately altering the way you observe, you force the brain to abandon habitual predictions and open itself to new calculations. The most surprising point of this theory is that much of what you perceive doesn't come from outside, but from within. The retina captures light, the ear captures vibrations, the skin feels temperature, but the meaning, form, and even continuity of this information are organized by the brain based on what it already knows. What is familiar is confirmed and reinforced. What is unexpected requires rewriting. This explains why real changes can happen without any physical movement. If the brain reorganizes the prediction, what you call the present also reorganizes. What once seemed fixed can gain new colors, new contours, even new emotional possibilities. Pratyahara, seen through this lens, acts as a method to interrupt automatic predictions. By withdrawing the senses or using them in unconventional ways, you take the brain out of confirm what I already know mode and place it in what's happening now mode. This state of open attention is neurobiologically fertile for changes in perception because it weakens the rigidity of internal maps. A simple example: close your eyes and focus only on the most distant sound you can hear. By doing so, you temporarily suspend the avalanche of visual predictions and give your brain an unusual task. When you reopen your eyes, the feeling of space around you seems different, even if nothing physically changed. The difference lies in the internal map, which was updated by a break in the pattern of observation. Predictive coding also helps explain why it's so difficult to break certain emotional patterns. If someone has spent years expecting rejection, the brain creates predictions based on that expectation and interprets neutral signals as threats. It's like walking with an old map that insists on showing bridges where there are rivers and walls where there are roads. The real landscape may offer paths, but the prediction blocks the view. On the other hand, when you consciously interrupt that predictive chain, whether through meditative practice, a symbolic act, or a radical shift of focus, you offer the brain a chance to recalculate. And that recalculation is, in practice, a redesign of the present. This is where science and spirituality meet in almost poetic harmony. The ancients spoke of withdrawing the light from the stage to dissolve a scene. Scientists speak of violating predictions to generate learning and updates. Both describe the same phenomenon. When you stop feeding the known script, the enacted reality loses power, and another one can begin. The beauty of this convergence is that it requires neither blind faith nor exclusive lab validation, only experience. By changing the way you observe, you change what your brain believes is happening. And when belief changes, the experience changes too. Thus, predictive coding is not just a technical concept. It's a reminder that the reality you live in is to a large extent an internal construction, sustained by predictions that can be rewritten at any time. The ancient trick of observation, therefore, doesn't act on the outside. It hacks the builder operating within. And that's when the glass river of time begins to reflect a whole new course. From an early age, we are taught to see time as a straight line. The past pushes the present, and the present pushes the future. This logic seems unquestionable, as if events were blocks of stone falling onto one another, obeying the gravity of a single direction. But what if that weren't the whole story? There are spiritual traditions that claim the present is not born from the past, it is born from the interpretations you hold right now. And more. These interpretations don't need to come only from memory. They can come from a future you choose to feel as if it were already real. It's a thought that challenges the linear narrative and, at the same time, finds resonance in discoveries from quantum physics. In the phenomenon of quantum entanglement, two particles can behave as if they were one, even when separated by vast distances. The state of one instantly determines the state of the other, without depending on the passage of time or a signal traveling between them. It's as if the information exists beyond the sequence of before and after. For some physicists and philosophers, this suggests that the fabric of reality is more interdependent than we imagine, and that events separated by time may be connected by an invisible, simultaneous layer. If we carry this idea into human experience, it becomes possible to imagine that the emotions, perceptions, and choices you cultivate now are not merely reactions to a fixed past, but seeds that also shape what you perceive as memory and as destiny. This changes everything because it shifts the point of power. What you call now ceases to be the final effect of a chain of causes and becomes the center of a field where past and future are reorganized. This change in perspective, however, doesn't happen through logical reasoning alone. It requires a sensory, almost poetic break. That's where an old story comes in, passed down orally, with no certainty whether it happened in the physical world or only in the symbolic realm. It tells of a traveler who arrived at a tall gate, guarded by a still presence, a messenger of silence. There was no lock, no visible doors, only the certainty that the path beyond was blocked. The traveler tried to push through, tried to argue, tried to wait. Nothing happened, until in a moment of exhaustion, he tilted his head slightly to one side, like someone changing the angle to observe a precious stone. In that minimal gesture, the gate disappeared. Not because it was open, but because it ceased to exist for the gaze that had once sustained it. Read literally, this story may seem like just a fable, but as a metaphor of perception, it is a map. The gate is the fixed pattern, the mental script that says this is impossible. The messenger of silence is reality, unmoving until your observation changes. The tilt of the head is the shift in perspective, small, almost imperceptible to the outside world, yet capable of dissolving entire barriers in the inner world. When you reverse the view of time and allow the present to be shaped by a felt future, you begin to act like this traveler. The change doesn't come from pushing, forcing, or repeating what's already been tried. It comes from altering the angle of observation to one where the obstacle no longer holds. From the perspective of predictive coding, this is a break in the deep expectations the brain maintains. By experiencing an emotional state that belongs to a desired future, peace, clarity, abundance, you present the brain with data that is incoherent with the current map. It is forced to recalculate, to update the scenario. And in that process, both the narrative of the past and the projection of the future can be rewritten. In practice, it's as if time ceases to be a road and becomes a network. You move not just forward, but also across diagonal connections, jumping from one point to another without following the expected sequence. By tuning into a chosen future, you change the tone of the story you tell about your past and with it, transform the present moment. This view is uncomfortable for a mind that favors linearity, because it removes the sense of chronological control. But that's precisely where freedom lies. If the present is not a prisoner of a line, it can be shaped from any point in the web. The touch that alters the glass river can come from behind, ahead, or from a place that fits no known direction. And perhaps that's what traditions and physics, each in their own way, are trying to tell us. It is not time that builds the present. It is the present that shapes time. When you change the angle from which you observe it, the entire course can reorganize. Not because the laws have bent, but because the map that once drew them is no longer the same. There are moments when life feels like a hallway of locked doors. You walk, try one lock, force another, repeat attempts, but the cold metal doesn't yield. Over time, the effort begins to weigh heavier than hope. This is the scenario in which the ancient observation trick operates, not as a show of strength, but as something like a key that suddenly turns on its own. This key is not hidden in your pocket or locked in a distant vault. It is made of attention, more precisely, of the way attention is positioned. As long as you keep it tied to what confirms the difficulty, it's as if the lock mechanism remains rigid, stuck. But when the focus shifts, even for a moment, something in the internal alignment reorganizes, and the door that once seemed impassable gives way. Neuroscience offers a clear background for this metaphor. When the brain detects a mismatch between what it expects and what it perceives, it enters update mode. It's as if the nervous system receives a signal. The map doesn't match the territory and revise. This revision, though silent, is one of the most powerful moves the body-mind can perform. Perception networks reconfigure, and with them, the emotional responses that were once automatic. Think of a difficult conversation. You go in expecting resistance, interpret every gesture as confirmation of tension, and brace for conflict. In this state, your body and mind are closed. The lock is stiff. But if for some reason, an unexpected detail breaks that expectation, a genuine smile, an unscripted phrase, a silence that isn't hostile, the internal system needs to reorient. In that moment, there is room for a new interpretation to arise, and something that was stuck can move. The observation trick used by ancient mystics is, in essence, a deliberate way to create this beneficial error in predictions. By shifting the point of attention, you interrupt the chain of confirmations that keeps the present stuck. It's like slightly moving the key inside the lock so that the mechanism finds a new position and suddenly turns. What's most intriguing is that, often, it's not about discovering something new but seeing what was always there, outside the usual focus. The door didn't appear out of nowhere. It was always there. The key wasn't made in the moment. It was always yours. What changes is the internal combination that allows the two to meet. This metaphor of the key that turns on its own also reveals an important point. Real change doesn't depend on effort proportional to the problem. You don't need to push harder or knock more frequently. What dissolves the block is a precise adjustment, and that adjustment rarely comes from haste or blind insistence. It arises when attention stops fighting reality and starts exploring other angles of perception. That's why practices like Pratyahara don't require you to abandon everything, but rather to reposition how you're present in the world. By withdrawing the senses or directing attention to non-obvious aspects of the experience, you create the conditions for the brain to recognize a new scenario. That internal novelty is enough to trigger reorganization processes, which then reflect in how you feel and act. It's not uncommon that after such a practice, people report subtle changes, almost impossible to explain. A weight that felt constant becomes lighter. A previously avoided conversation flows effortlessly. A decision that once seemed impossible becomes obvious. There's no magic in the theatrical sense. There is the reorganization of the inner field, which allows new external developments. Perhaps the most fitting image is this. Instead of thinking you're breaking a barrier, imagine you're allowing something already prepared to reveal itself. The door was only locked to the old position of the key. By changing the way you hold it, the way you look, the way you focus, the mechanism recognizes an alignment and opens. The key turns, but the movement that turns it comes from within. Understanding this brings a deep liberation. You don't need to conquer every change through the weight of effort. There are transformations that happen the moment you create, within yourself, the condition for them to move. And that condition always begins at the point where you place your attention. It is there that the cold metal of apparent reality begins to yield, revealing that the door was never as solid as it seemed. There are entire areas of perception that you carry with you every day without noticing. They are like corners of your vision that remain out of frame, not because they don't exist, but because your attention rarely moves toward them. This forgotten territory is what we might call the blind spot of presence, the place where reality keeps unfolding, but doesn't receive the seal of your consciousness. It is precisely there that the ancient trick becomes most effective. The proposal of this technique is simple in form but intense in effect, to provoke a small deviation in the automatic route of attention so that the brain is forced to recalibrate the map of now. It's not about emptying the mind or seeking an immediate mystical vision, but about creating a break in the sequence of predictions that keeps the present moment the same as itself. Begin by finding a space where you can remain for a few moments without interruptions. Sit or stand comfortably, but with an awakened body. Gently close your eyes. By doing this, you're already beginning to withdraw the main stage of vision, which is where much of attention tends to be anchored. Now, instead of seeking silence, allow all the surrounding sounds to present themselves. Don't try to identify their sources. Don't name them as footsteps, voices, wind, or machines. Simply receive them as waves arriving at the surface of your perception. Notice the nearby sounds and those that seem more distant, without trying to bring any closer or push any away. After a few seconds, choose among them the most distant sound you can perceive. It might be a nearly faded noise, a frequency that would be irrelevant in any other moment. Direct your attention to it as if you were mentally walking toward it. It's not about imagining a specific place. It's just allowing your focus to shift, as though traversing the space that separates you from that vibration. Remain in this listening for a few moments, as if placing your ear against a thin veil to sense what lies behind it. Then, without rushing, open your eyes again. Don't look for anything in particular. Don't force your gaze toward familiar objects or faces. Just allow the scene before you to reveal itself on its own, as if it were the first time you were seeing it. What happens in this moment is more than a return to physical vision. The brain, accustomed to predicting and confirming what lies ahead, receives an unusual interval. The absence of sound identification and the attention directed toward a peripheral element create a gap in its predictions. This gap acts like an empty space in the map, a place where new possibilities can be drawn. For many people, the sensation upon opening their eyes is of a slight expansion of space, as if the environment had gained more depth. Others notice that the body feels more stable or that colors appear more vivid. None of this means that the physical world has changed, only that the way of accessing it has been reconfigured. This recalibration from the perspective of predictive coding is like updating a system that had been operating with outdated files. By momentarily removing the weight of automatic interpretation, you offer the brain a new sensory and emotional reference. The present stops being merely the confirmation of what already was and becomes a novel experience, even within a familiar setting. The most important thing is to understand that the value of the technique does not lie only in the moment it is performed, but in the skill it awakens, realizing that your attention doesn't need to remain trapped at the obvious center of the scene. By learning to shift it toward neglected territories, like a distant sound, a barely noticed texture, or the silence between two words, you begin to break the dominance of automatic patterns. With practice, this shifting becomes more natural. You begin to notice in the middle of a conversation or an ordinary task that you can tilt your attention toward a point that changes the quality of the moment. It's an invisible gesture to anyone watching from the outside, but powerful enough to alter how time organizes itself inside you. That's the secret of the blind spot of presence. It's not a fixed place, but any zone of perception that, when illuminated by attention, reveals a different version of the now. And in doing so, it opens the same creative space that the ancients sought in the withdrawal of the senses, a space where the glass river of time can choose a new course. The moment you are in now is not a fixed point in time. It is malleable matter, shaped by the invisible touch of your observation. With each shift of attention, you alter the contour of what you live. It's not the world that needs to move first. It's your gaze that decides whether the scene remains or transforms. When you realize this, You understand that every breath is a chance to rewrite. What once seemed like a single road becomes an open field, where past and future bend before the one who dares to observe differently. Do not conclude in haste. Breathe. Reality approaches when you stop demanding proof and begin to feel the space that opens. If you've made it this far, write in the comments, "I turn the key from within." I want to know that this message reached you to the very last moment.